Dr. Koch Barry, thank you. And this morning, I want to share some thoughts that reflect on this morning's Parsha, but also will kind of stick with us as we dive into the greater Exodus story, and really kind of the Parshiot that are coming our way over the next couple weeks, and the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, but also really all the turmoil that takes place within Egypt before that happens. So as I said, this morning is really our first introduction to Moses. And Moses grows up incredibly quickly. In the course of the first 5 chapters of the book of Exodus, Moses is born and ages about, give or take, 80 years. He'll stay around 80 for all of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and most of Numbers. And really from that point, fast forwards from the age of 81 or so to 119. And that's, of course, after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness towards the end of the book of Numbers. So it is in his 80th year, when he takes on the mantle of the leadership of the Israelites, that we see Moses' personality develop the most. And we see the tension between his newly found confidence as a leader and his persistent self-doubt, as these two qualities flare up at seemingly every crossroad for him. The transition into the book of Exodus is always going to be a little bit bumpy for us as readers. With the completion of the book of Genesis, we leave behind the stories of the patriarchs and matriarchs. And no matter how much time we spend on those stories, no matter how many questions we ask, it's jarring to read the 8th verse in Exodus. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. It seems like in some ways we too are supposed to forget about Joseph and his family and accept the status quo. That those stories are ancient history. We're firmly in Egypt now. Which makes the beginning of Moses' saga all that much more whiplash-inducing. He is born into slavery and saved from the brink of death by his family and the Nile, and he's taken into the palace by Pharaoh's daughter. He kills an Egyptian and is sent into exile, brought back to the lowly status of a man wandering through the wilderness. And finally, he meets and marries the daughter of a Midianite priest, clawing his way back up in society. It's a lot of this. By the time he encounters God at the burning bush, Moses seems content with the status quo. He begs God to leave him be, imploring God to send somebody else, really anyone else, in his stead. But Moses is God's man, and so, armed with a staff and a bag of divine tricks, he heads back to Egypt. The Israelites believe in him. They believe on his mission. They believe in his mission. He's finally hitting his stride. So he marches right into Pharaoh's palace and makes his demands of Pharaoh with no niceties or pleasantries. He doesn't even use any honorifics when addressing Pharaoh. He just dives right in. Thus says Adonai, the God of Israel, let my people go. And in response, Moses gets laughed out of the room. I think we've all been there in some way or another. We know how hard it is to prepare to give someone a piece of our mind, or to build up the courage it takes to maybe ask for a raise or an extra day off, or to tell someone to do the right thing when we know that they're acting otherwise. We march into that office, head held high, telling ourselves that we won't take no for an answer until the answer is no. You can imagine the air going out of Moses' sails like a leaky balloon. It seems that Moses was not prepared for this possibility. That's why, I believe, he doesn't go back to the people and report these events. He was totally unprepared for failure. Instead, the Israelite taskmasters find him and Aaron milling outside the gates of Pharaoh's palace. Moses and Aaron have no idea what their next move should be, so they do their utmost to avoid making one. Only after Moses is chastised by the people suffering as a result of his actions and words does he finally turn back to God and say, "O Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and still you have not delivered your people." The commentators have a field day with this verse, and in many ways, their diametrically opposed positions stand for all of the mixed feelings we may come to harbor towards Moses throughout the rest of the Torah. The Israeli Torah scholar Nechama Leibowitz quotes the two opposing sides. First, she brings the rabbis of the Talmud who come down very hard on Moses. And for this statement, Moses, our teacher, was punished, as it is stated, "For since I came to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has dealt ill with this people. Said the Holy One unto Moses," and this is Midrash, this is not Torah quote anymore, "Alas, for those who are gone and irreplaceable. Behold, I revealed myself many times to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, and they did not question my ways. They did not ask me, what is your name? I said unto Abraham, arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for unto you I will give it. He sought a burial plot for Sarah and did not find one until he bought it for 400 shekels of silver, and yet he did not question my ways. Yet you did say unto me, what is your name? At the beginning. And now you say unto me, nor have you delivered your people at all. Therefore," and this is God once more speaking to Moses, "therefore, now you shall witness what I will do to Pharaoh. In the Exodus, the battle with Pharaoh will you witness, but you will not witness the battle with the 31 kings in the conquest of Canaan." Meaning, according to this passage, Pharaoh might not recognize or remember Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, but God certainly does. And God feels remiss that Moses does not measure up to their standards. The rabbis imagine that this moment of doubt, so early on in Moses' leadership career, when he's seen the burning bush, but very little else of God's might, condemns Moses from the outset. And it's at this moment when the rabbis decipher that Moses is never going to make it into the promised land. The authors of Exodus Rabbah, likely written about 1,000 years after the Talmud, hold Moses in a much more sympathetic light. They take issue with Moses' statement here because God has already told him that Pharaoh would not let the people go right away. Surely, even a new leader can't be that obtuse. And of course, they answer, he's not. Rather, Moses is ever the good shepherd. And in this instance, he truly can't bear to see the people suffer. And so, even though he does know better, Moses beseeches God, why did you bring harm upon this people? And the Midrash describes God's reaction. First anger, then mercy, recognizing that God did in fact pick a suitable leader for the Israelites, a leader who would advocate for them and not simply cower before the might of people or before the power of God. Nechama Leibowitz famously wrote her Torah commentary in what is essentially a pen pal format. This was back in the 50s and 60s. She would send her students essays on the weekly Parsha with sources interspersed, and at the end of these, she would leave them questions for further thought. The prompt she leaves her students in conjunction with these two diametrically opposed takes on the same verse is, describe the feelings which prompted Moses to utter these statements. It's an unusual charge for a teacher to give her traditional-minded students in the 50s and 60s. Yet what I think she is recognizing is that we cannot approach this text without trying to understand the humanity contained within. The Torah gives us the words. We need to find the feelings, to imagine the precariousness Moses must have felt in his new position of leadership, the frustration of the people when their hard work got harder, God overseeing it all while promising to take the people out of Egypt, yet directing events in maybe the most convoluted way possible. Over the coming weeks, as we continue reading this foundational story of Jewish history, Moses' ascendancy, the shows of God's might, the downfall of Pharaoh, the exodus from Egypt, I challenge us to keep in mind Professor Leibowitz's prompt. Look for the feelings and approach these stories through the lens of the age-old Passover Seder maxim of reading the story as if it were you yourself going out of Egypt.